Welcome everyone to Choice Conversations, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your life, one choice at a time. I'm your host, Chris Stefan. Let's do this. Welcome everyone. In today's episode, I've got Philip Frey from the Valiant Growth podcast, and we're going to talk about the series he did recently on stress-free relationships, going over how to bring a philosophical look to your relationships and improve the relationships you have, get rid of the ones that are taking away from your life, and really nourish and nurture the ones that are adding value to your life. So we've got lots of great tips in there. You're going to love it. A couple quick notes. So Choice Conversations now has an email address if you would like to email me. It's chris@choiceconversations.com. chris@choiceconversations.com. And there's a button at the very top of choiceconversations.com. If you go there, there's an email button at the top. You can click on that and it'll get you there as well. Also, comments are now enabled on the website. So if you want to go in and leave a comment, give some feedback, what you think about the various episodes, that is always welcome. And, as usual, it would be great if you could go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, review, give me a nice rating, leave a review. That really helps the show to grow. It helps it to show up in the iTunes searches. So I would really appreciate it if you could do that for me. All right, let's dive into the show. Why don't you take a minute to introduce yourself to my listeners?
Yeah, so I'm Philip Frey, and I run the Valiant Growth podcast. The Valiant Growth podcast is in many ways similar to Choice Conversations in the subjects that I address. Only it is mostly solo shows. So I talk about personal development, and the reason why I created the podcast was to bring together kind of the softer topics of psychology, therapy, things like that, kind of gentleness, empathy, bring them together with the harder, outer-facing stuff of personal finances, goal management, productivity, things like that, and put it into a podcast that people can consume. So those are mainly the subjects that are addressed. It's pretty new. It's started 3 months ago, and but there are already 41 episodes out there. So that's Valiant Growth.
Your number of episodes is pretty impressive. So what else is impressive? Like you were saying, Choice Conversations is very similar in the content, but on Choice Conversations, as the name implies, my show, I'm Chris Stefan, by the way, for Philip's listeners, I typically interview people, but lately I have started doing some more solo shows, and I find the solo shows to be a lot more challenging, because it's up to me how much the content that's created, right? So I now have a lot of respect for people who do solo shows, and when I listen to the work you're doing and the really great job you do at bringing clarity to these issues, these topics that are, so important. It's I have a lot of respect for it. So I'm loving your ones right now, your show right now, and especially I'm enjoying this series you're doing on stress-free relationships. So I guess, how did you get the idea to do a series on stress-free relationships?
Well, first of all, thank you, Chris. I'm glad you're enjoying them. It's it basically started off as one episode, and the first episode was on the difference between friends and allies, and I wanted to address that topic for some time because I think it's an important distinction. But I realized that simply putting out a show called Friends versus Allies, Why the Difference Matters, or something like that, it doesn't really address people's needs. And kind of a strategy that I've been taking in naming my shows is to look at what problem I'm solving or what need I'm addressing. And that's where I came up with okay, stress-free relationships is what I'm trying to help people with. And then I said, okay, I have other things that tie into it, so let's make it into a series.
Yeah, well, it's a great topic and a great title for the series, because the stress in people's relationships is probably the single biggest thing that causes people to be unhappy. It's the single biggest point of strife in people's lives, at least in my experience. I'm sure every person is different, but in general, I would say that's the case for the majority of people. So it's a subject that has a lot of attraction, and if you can bring some mastery to that area of your life, and really develop some skills and some reflect on it and on what works and what doesn't work and why you're doing the things you're doing, and then take that kind of a philosophical outlook to relationships, you can really have a lot of tremendous growth in your relationships, and really get better at relationships. Because in our society, or at least in American society where I grew up, where I live now, this isn't something people talk about at all. As far as like having skills and relationships, it's amazing to me how important this is and how little attention it gets. Like the communication. I mean, is there a more important skill to being successful? Like if you think of all the single skills that there are out there of being successful in your life, however it is you measure success, it almost doesn't matter what your definition of success is, or what to you would be success. Is there a more important skill than communication? I mean, outside of maybe self-knowledge, if you can call self-knowledge a skill, I don't know that there is, but yet this is not something that is taught in schools. It's not something that really is taught other than by example, by parents or leaders in the community and things of that nature. So yeah, it's really fascinating how this is something that people are just supposed to know. And parenting is another great one. Yeah. Is parenting everybody just assumes they know how to parent because their parents raised them and they turned out all right. Or the same thing with relationships. It's like people don't think they need marriage counseling or relationship counseling. And despite the fact that the numbers are so overwhelming that most people fail in these areas, that, the majority of marriages end in divorce. But how many people go to marriage counseling just to get the skills to be better at marriage before the relationship is on the rocks? It's like almost none. Yeah. It's really a kind of a bizarre thing in our society, how little attention is brought to this topic. So I love it, the work you're doing and the attention you're bringing to it. And you had mentioned your first episode where you talked about the difference between friends and allies. Why don't you just give a quick summary of that? I know that, your listeners have probably already heard it, and I encourage my listeners to go back and listen to that. But before we dive into that deeper, if you could just give like a quick summary of what the different levels of friendship are that you detailed in that episode. Yeah. So let me just answer some of the things that you said before I go on to that. Yeah, sure. No, I absolutely agree that stress is the biggest issue, and relationships in particular are the biggest source of stress. I personally think that, and you probably will agree with this, that it's more kind of the personal psychological problems that get played out in relationships, and that's the real source of stress there. But of course, the manifestation is always within the context of the relationship. Yes. And I would agree with that. Sure. Yeah, and also it is indeed interesting that I think people don't see relationships as a skill or the different things that go into them, like communication, things like that. They don't see it as a skill, which is very, very surprising, but it's kind of understandable. There's so many things in life that people don't see as a skill, and sometimes it's enough to tell them, hey, procrastination is not a character trait. It's, for example, it's a lack of a skill. And they're like, oh, yeah, okay, now I understand. And I think it's similar. I had the fortune of
being exposed to some communication skill training, just because I was going through kind of a business education in Romania, and it wasn't part of the formal education, but you always had people organizing courses and workshops and things like that. But it's interesting that you have it there, but you don't really have it anywhere else, perhaps journalism accepted. So let me get on to the to the friends versus allies. So this is not my idea, but I picked it up and developed it. The core concept is that it helps to differentiate what level of closeness you have with the people in your life, and that can by itself dictate kind of the rules and how you engage with them and how intimate you get with them. And the basic concept is you have friends who are part of your support network, and you have allies who are not part of your support network, whom you simply have some kind of shared common goal or activity or something like that you do together, limitedly. But you can't call them up for help me move my furniture or lend me $50. That's where you go into friendship. That's where you go into support networks. And kind of the levels that I have is that you have accidental allies or bulk chosen allies, which is the more accurate term. There's less fancy, which is basically the people who you can't directly control. You have them in your life, such as your coworker. So you choose the place of work, but you can't really most of the time influence who you're working with. You still have a shared goal, but yeah, you can't make individual choices about them. You can leave the place, but that's it. Or on the other end, it could be the support staff at your ISP. You can't really influence who picks up your call, so you kind of have to deal with it. The next level is chosen allies. It's people who you have individual control over. So if you have a tennis coach or, someone you go shopping with, or someone who picks you up in a carpool, those are all chosen allies. And then you have friends, which are people who you have a support network with, who you both there's kind of an implicit or explicit pledge to support one another. And I differentiate between friends and close friends insofar as close friends are the people who you have an emotional support network with. So the people who you actually can talk to about your emotions and also about your kind of life goals and big picture struggles that you're faced with. And then you have romantic partners where you have the extra layer of romantic love and sexuality, and you have a co-parent where you're raising a child together. Those are the levels.
Nice. Yeah. And to me, this seems like a more mature version of what Harry Browne put forth in his book, How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World. Is something I've referenced several times in Choice Conversations. That his book was very influential for me because, I'd come from the Freedomain Radio community, as you have spent some time there yourself, right?
Yes.
And at least back in the day when Steph was a hardcore anarchist, he used to make the against me argument. So this was, for those who aren't familiar, if you support the state, you support the use of state violence against me. That's what it was.
Yeah.
And so if you're not an anarchist, then you're my enemy. He's like, I don't break bread with statists. He made that statement on numerous occasions. And boy, is that tough to have that attitude in the modern world where anarchists are like such a minority, right? So, you're talking about a topic that it's very emotional when you bring it up with people, especially that haven't heard these arguments before and had a chance to process them and the like, and they get really triggered. I remember hearing Steph say things too, like bringing philosophy into your relationships is like throwing a grenade into the room. And, I was really struggling when I was first becoming aware of these different concepts of voluntarism and the non-aggression principle, and really struggling in my relationships, and then I got so much value out of that Harry Browne, because he kind of presented something similar, like I said, a more primitive version of what you just talked about, where he talks about just, if you enjoy watching sports and having a beer with people, but you don't enjoy talking politics with them, then don't talk politics with them. Watch sports and drink a beer with them, but don't talk about politics. Maximize the areas where you get value from the relationships with people by sticking to those areas, and the areas where it doesn't add value to your life, don't go into those areas. So essentially, to me, that was it's kind of a similar thing, defining people as allies in certain areas. Your tennis coach is an ally, and they're there to help you learn this particular skill, right? But that doesn't mean that you guys have to agree on all the various areas of philosophy and the like.
Right.
And boy, does that really help to make life smoother, and you'd be able to have connection with people and have more people in your life, because that's one of the basic human needs, is community and connection with others. And you could be very lonely, especially if you're an anarchist or an atheist, and you don't have this kind of awareness, if you don't have some way to think about what the different relationships are in your life and how to manage them. That's been something that has been really, really fundamental for me in improving the quality of my life, is when I looked at these relationships in this manner. Now, are you familiar with Harry Browne's work? And if you are, what do you think of his concepts versus what you're doing, like the contrasting of the two?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not. I know the name. I know the name of his book, his famous book. I know his portfolio, but I've never actually read him. And it's entirely possible. I got the concept from my therapist, actually, and it's very possible that it kind of went through that route. But I don't know him. But I can say that I was facing a very, very similar problem in my own life. Like you said, it makes it. Yeah, going with the against me and this kind of approach makes it very difficult. And for me, the extra kind of challenge was consuming content on the internet. And I'd always be very upset when I would find someone who had many interesting things to say, and then would talk about many subjects that I like, but then it would turn out that they were statists, or they were abusive parents, as defined by kind of more advanced parenting, and that would really upset me. And I think it was in response to this that my therapist just gave me this idea of oh yeah, you have friends, you have allies, you don't have to agree 100% on everything to make things work. And I ran with it, and it really helped me a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would also add to that not only is it unnecessary to have philosophical agreement with your tennis coach, but it's also, I think, kind of inappropriate, in my opinion, to spring these deep philosophical conversations on random people, where it's not really a part of what you're meant to do in that context, like at the workplace, or even when watching a sports game. Like you're there to watch the sports game, not to talk about why taxation is theft and why they've been living a lie and they're supporting evil. Like it's not appropriate. I don't think it's conducive to spreading the word. I think now that we have the internet, it's perhaps you can perhaps quote unquote convert more people by simply being a pleasant person, and then having a podcast that they can access on their own time, and they can kind of learn about the ideas without the pressure of personal confrontation.
Right. I'm sure what happens when people first discover the concepts of liberty and the like, I call it unplugging from the matrix, and seeing the world for what it is. You're living a lie, like you said.
Yeah.
When you do that, it's so profound. When that light bulb comes on, in the beginning, you want to share it with everyone.
Yeah.
And there's just such pushback and anger and so much emotion. It's kind of jarring when it happens, but it seems like a very common experience that, almost universally, when people unplug from the matrix, they go out and try to share it and have some very unpleasant experiences. And I think you're right. And probably in some cases it is inappropriate to be going into these subjects, and the people are not ready for them. It really is almost like slapping them in the face.
Yeah.
And that way it is kind of an inappropriate thing to do. It's that they're not prepared for this, for better or worse. This is reality, that it's going to be jarring to them if you bring up this topic.
Yeah. And it's kind of very, it is, I think it can be, depending on the tone, it can be even humiliating, because you're saying, okay, you lived for decades and decades, but there's this very, very fundamental thing that you've never realized, and you've been, if you approach it from that angle, you've been evil and condoning evil and enabling evil because you haven't realized this really obvious thing. That's some intense stuff right there.
Right. Well, and the other thing too is, if you're not really polished in how you present it, and you're not very careful in how you present it, you're going to come across as the crazy one.
Yeah.
Also, yeah. It would be really almost no different than if you went up to somebody and told them, literally, I unplugged from the matrix. This is all a computer program and it's not real, and you're living a lie. I mean, it's like they look at you almost the same way as that. They're like, wow, that person is crazy. I cannot believe that they really think that. And just having that awareness that, look, that's how you're going to come across. You're going to come across as a crazy person, to a lot of people. It's definitely something that if you are an anarchist, if you are an atheist, if you have unplugged from the matrix, if you're really questioning the mainstream in these areas, that it's generally not accepted to do it, then you really need to think about these things. It'll be very helpful for your own peace of mind and your own amount of peace you have in your life. So,
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I also think that it's entirely possible, because I can imagine people thinking like, okay, so if you never talk about it, how is this going to spread, right? So if you keep it as a secret because it's inappropriate, you're doing a disservice to the movement or something like that. But yeah, I think you're doing a disservice to the movement when you're springing it out onto people, philosophy bomb style. Like that's much more certain to turn them away, and if they value the relationship with you and you kind of build something and you go forward and you achieve kind of levels of connection that are where it becomes appropriate, they're much more likely to listen to you and to consider it.
Right. Now, I only discovered this methodology of organizing relationships, of managing relationships and the like, after having unplugged from the matrix. But I can imagine, had I been plugged into the matrix still and discovered this, that it would have still brought as much value to my life. Again, just having that conscious awareness of, okay, is this person in my support network or not? Is this person, where are they adding value to my life and where are they taking away from my life? And having that awareness and being able to focus on those areas and, maximize the areas where they are adding value and minimize the areas where they're not adding value, I would have been much happier and had much better relationships, even without having this very strongly outside the mainstream view in some very key areas that you and me share, and I'm sure several of our listeners do. Yeah, just great skills for anyone to have. Now, when you get into I think it was the second episode of the series, the second or third, you started talking about love.
Yeah.
And you started off by defining it. I'm trying to remember what your definition was. I know you mentioned Stefan Molyneux's definition and maybe added something to it.
It was a combination of Ayn Rand's and Stefan Molyneux's definition. So it was, if I remember correctly, an unconditional response to our highest values. Yeah, I think that's the combination of the two.
Right. And I know that you listed that like the values that you hold dear, that you look for.
Yes.
Purpose, morality, and courage. Those were the virtues that you held highest. I thought that was really interesting to sit there and detail out what it is you value and why it is you're drawn to some people and not to others. It's a really interesting exercise to do, is to sit here and think about what are the virtues that I value the most, and then look at the people around you. Especially if you're going into those areas of up the chain to like a close friend or a romantic partner, and it can really help to find better friendships, better matches, because it's interesting. There's, we're all animals, and physical attraction is such a strong component in when we come to like romantic relationships, right? And I think it's what, the vast majority of people are just driven by that. Most people tend to, they go out with, they end up marrying the most attractive person that they're capable of getting.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really help you at all for a long-term relationship, which is, we talked earlier about how, most marriages end in divorce sort of thing. I don't want to minimize the animal part of us, because it is reality that we are these animals, and we have these this very physical component to us, but at the same time it needs to be like just one component. It shouldn't be and not necessarily the biggest component. Like an example would be, there are many women that I'm physically attracted to, that their level of attractiveness would be sufficient for me to consider a romantic relationship with. And I think that it's important that you have a physical attraction, but that's just like one component of like the basic minimum requirements for a romantic relationship, then you have to get into these other areas, like you had your list of purpose, morality, courage, and the like. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where does physical attraction fit in your views on relationships, on romantic relationships? Because I know some people, again, not to keep going back to Stefan Molyneux, but I've heard him say many times to like just disregard looks. I think I've heard him say even like these specific words, fuck looks. When your baby's been up all night and you're having to, change their diaper at 4 a.m, looks aren't going to matter.
Right. And
I don't know that I would go that far. I know I have some friends that are very philosophically aware, very knowledgeable. They have a high degree of self-knowledge and do take a philosophical approach to relationships and know what their values are on all these things. And they are still like, well, I've got to be attracted, right? That person would be a good friend, maybe, because we have these virtues in common, or that I really like these virtues they have, but I'm not attracted to them. I wouldn't seek them out for a romantic partner. I just wouldn't. It's just like a given. So, I guess what are your thoughts in that area?
Yeah, I think we kind of have a similar perspective. I came from that school through Freedomain Radio. I came from that school that looks don't matter and just ignored them. That was my position a while ago. But then I had a good friend, and he kind of pushed back. He pushed back on it, and he made me think of he made me think about it. And I kind of came to a similar conclusion that, well, at least the way I see it now is it's kind of a minimal floor. Like it's not the major deciding factor as long as that minimum floor is met, or that, if it's a person that you are attracted to, and in that pool you use the virtues to find the best, but you got to stay in that pool. And that's my That's my opinion on it. I think that where there's no physical attraction, that's it's going to be a very difficult relationship. And also I think that there's a level of value added by people who take care of their looks, and that's a nice little extra bonus that you can bring as added value to the trade that is your partnership.
Right. It tells you something about someone's level of self-knowledge if they are obese.
Yeah.
Some factors in appearance are completely out of people's control, right? But their weight is not. And women don't have to be thin as a rail, for me to be attracted to them. Even women that would be considered thick, can still be beautiful. But when they're obese, when it's very clear that they're not even trying, that's a red flag to me, not just because of they don't meet the minimum floor of physical attractiveness, the base requirement, but more that, okay, there's something really wrong there. I mean, essentially they're an addict. It's just they're an addict to food, which is something that is socially acceptable, as opposed to people like drugs or gambling and things like that, where it's not socially acceptable. But in my mind, I don't know that being an addict to food makes you any less damaged than somebody who's an addict to heroin.
Yeah.
I think psychologically, I'm not sure that there's a difference. Obviously the physical effects, the one is a slow death and the other one's a quick death, right? But the mental wounding, the lack of being holistically healthy is the same. So that would be one reason to seriously consider, not dating someone who's obese.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that's an area where kind of our biological instincts come very nicely together with our understanding of psychology. Yeah.
I almost hate to say that because big girls need love too,
Right.
But and I guess it's a different story too if you're working on it. But the thing is, I guess if you're working on it, eventually it's not going to be a problem anymore if you're able to stick with it. A lot of people that are overweight have worked on it, but they're not able to stick with it. There's something wrong that isn't being addressed, That's also, this is kind of straying off the topic of relationships a bit, but I think one of the big reasons why people fail at losing weight is because they don't look at it as an addiction, and that there is a psychological component that needs to be healed, that's the root problem to their weight. They think the problem is, well, I eat too much or I don't exercise enough. And that's the surface problem, but it's not the root problem. And, if you don't address that root problem, you're going to really struggle to make any kind of progress. So that's why I really like the health experts that bring a focus on the emotional side. Kevin Geary is a good friend of mine at the Rebooted Body. And, he's always included the emotional side as a really key component, as a pillar to the service he offers when he consults with people, really gets into that root cause, and has just actually released a new program, Decode Your Cravings, where it's really just, I think it's almost 100% focusing in on the emotional side and what's driving you to eat, as opposed to what foods you should be eating, kind of thing.
Yeah. I have an episode on weight loss as well, kind of back in the earlier ones. And I agree with you, though I think it's really a combination of both psychological unawareness, but also I think people have just generally really poor systems, because there's a confusing and there's a lot of confusing and not effective diets and recommendations and kind of contradictory advice and nonsensical advice out there. So
right.
I myself have lost quite a bit of weight recently, and I did it. I was in therapy at the time, but I never really consciously focused on it, and I simply kind of powered through with just looking at calories and doing it that way. And I think you can lose weight with a good system, at least temporarily, even if you don't address the psychological roots. But long term, that's the only sustainable way.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. The information out there, a lot of it is conflicting, and if you get the wrong information, it's not going to work for you. And if you're eating a diet where you're constantly hungry and you're having to fight hunger, like a low-fat diet, for instance, which was mentioned as being is purported to being the best method to lose weight by so many people in the mainstream for so many years now. It's just really hard to sustain that because you're pretty much hungry all the time.
Yeah.
And, you're fighting biology as well. There can definitely be, if you have the wrong information, there can be a biological component to it as well. And also because our bodies, some people, the damage that modern living has done to them, there could be a lot of hormonal issues where even if you're doing the right thing, your body's not responding. The hormones aren't signaling the correct messages to your body to help you lose weight. And so you actually need to get your hormones in check first. There are things that you can do to do that, to get back on the right track. But if your hormones are all out of whack, you can actually be doing the right things and still not losing weight. It's very complex.
Yeah.
People are struggling and they're wanting to improve. I guess that's the big key is, are they wanting to improve? I guess they all probably are wanting to lose weight and look better and all that, but are they actually actively looking to make changes, kind of thing?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that would go into when it comes to my virtues, that would go into the purposefulness. And that would be a big plus if they're trying systematically to do something.
Right. Now, what about, you had said, the virtues that you value, again, purpose, morality, courage. To me, when I look at these virtues, it's not just like a yes or no thing. Oh, they're courageous, they're not courageous. They're moral, they're immoral. I mean, all these things seem to me like they're on a scale. One person might be like 8.6 on the morality meter, where another might be 5.7 or that sort of thing. There are times when you're very courageous, and there might be other times when you're not. So somebody having the virtue of courage, it's more, I guess, how often they display it, and that sort of thing. I mean, what are your thoughts on these virtues because we all have some level of courage. How does that figure in when you're trying to categorize people and really think philosophically and objectively about your relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's kind of a scale, and let me just add an important caveat here. This is not my full list. I have an 11 point list, and these are the three that I considered most important, and kind of the root of all of the others, things like self-esteem, empathy, honesty, rationality. I actually have it on my wall, so I can keep going. But yeah, so I kind of tried to look at their actions. Simply look at their actions, and I'm not courageous all of the time. I don't think anybody is courageous all of the time. So I just try to evaluate how they act. And I personally, when it comes to courage, I usually my most I think the best way that I can look at that is courage when it comes to accepting new ideas. That's, for me personally, that's how I see it. So if someone has the courage to be open and even to be intellectually honest and even humble and be vulnerable, and I see that, for me, that is a huge indication of a great level of courage.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, courage. We think of courage as the superhero kind of thing, or soldiers in the face of violence. But courage, it's something that can be displayed so often in so many different ways. Yeah, just like you said, being vulnerable, being willing to go against the mainstream narrative, like a lot of things we discuss in our shows, and to be vocal about that, there's definitely a lot of courage in that. So
yeah, looking into your history, that's also another one, kind of your childhood and what has happened to you, and your present relationships, and trying to be objective about it. I think that's probably one of the greatest feats of courage out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's really interesting, like I said, to go back and it's just such a great exercise to look at what different things you value are. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with Peter Breggin.
No.
He does a psychology show, the Peter Breggin Hour. But he has a definition of love, or at least he calls this the essential components that have to be there when there's love. And he talks about those components are respect, understanding, and goodwill. And I thought that was really interesting. It's not necessarily what virtues does somebody have that leads to me loving them, but more what elements are present whenever there is love. And I thought that was really, really a strong observation. I really, really liked that when he brought that forth. And I started thinking about it and the relationships I have in my life and the people I love, wanting to really cultivate these things, cultivate respect and understanding and goodwill. And, I look at relationships like the one I have with my daughter, the father-daughter relationship, and trying to bring more emphasis to this, being mindful of these things, of being respectful of her as a person and her desires, and really putting even more emphasis than I was before on empathy and understanding, goodwill, the wanting the best for the other person. I guess, what are your thoughts on that? The elements of, you might be in love if these things are present kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, kind of what approach you take, right? Because you can go either way, and I'm guessing that it's probably the more natural, more real world way is that you like your subconscious picks these things up first, probably before you can evaluate them. That's my guess. So I think that kind of model where, okay, so if you feel these things, it's love. It makes sense. It makes sense to me. And I actually think if you can kind of combine the two to kind of be able to separate love from things that are rooted in dysfunction, because that's often, it's easy to, especially in the beginning of self-knowledge, it's easy to conflate love and this kind of attachment or unhealthy attachment. But yeah, I think they're best used in conjunction. That's what I can say about that. And what I really like is that it includes goodwill. That is not something that's particularly present in either, Ayn Rand or Stefan Molyneux's approaches, and I think that's definitely something that has to be looked at, because the way I see it, and this will kind of be a spoiler for our future, the final episode of this series, is that
excellent.
Yeah, so I'm giving giving extra value here. The way I see it is these ideas that are kind of outlined in this series, and I also have another series called The Core Principles of Relationships, which is more kind of more theory level. I think these ideas, the things like look for virtues, things like assess people carefully, things like look for the trade, be careful not to be motivated by duty or pity or sacrifice. I see these as kind of relationship self-defense, they can really help you root out the kind of the people who are not contributing to you, who are harming you in some way, whether because they're evil or because they're simply hurt themselves and not willing or able to heal. It doesn't really matter, but it helps you filter through that and give you clear eyes. But it does not give you a framework for building the good relationships. That is my opinion, and I came to this as I kind of looked into Ayn Rand's personal life. Are you familiar with like A Passion of Ayn Rand and those books?
Well, I know a little bit about her personal life, but it's more from the Nathaniel Branden side.
Oh yeah,
from reading his work on her. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, so I didn't read his book yet because it's very expensive for some reason. But I did read Barbara Branden's book, and this is pretty inside baseball at this point, so I apologize
right.
for those who are not very familiar with Ayn Rand. But yeah, so she was a major philosopher and a major source of influence for all of these theories that we talk about when it comes to relationship and approaches. But if you look at her personal life, according to the people who were close to her at one point, it was pretty disastrous, and almost it was shocking, honestly, for me too. I knew about it, but when I actually read the book, it was shocking to see how spectacularly her relationships failed, and kind of as time went on, she grew more and more paranoid and more suspicious of people and more judgmental of people, and kind of quick to dismiss a person on kind of the slightest disagreement, including things like not having similar musical tastes. That would be a sign of broken philosophy on the part of the other person. And I personally see that as this philosophy of these tools of relationship self-defense taken to the extreme without anything on the constructive or kind of on the positive side. So that's how I see it, and I think it's important to combine the two. And for me personally, this positive side is my next area that I want to look into, because her relationships did not work. They were just abysmal. I guess nobody wants to have that. And as far as my experience goes with the Freedomain Radio community, there again, it's not really ideal. So you'd expect for people who have figured out, okay, these are all the rules of relationships, to have really great relationships. But at least I personally rarely saw that happening. Yeah.
Right. And Steph even wrote a book on communication, real-time relationships.
Right.
And I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but
I am.
I found the advice within it conceptually was maybe starting to go in the right direction, but how it was implemented, when you see the examples given in the book and how people use it within the community, the FDR community, it was very much alienating and breaking connection as opposed to, the fostering a connection between two people. So it was almost like the opposite direction of what you'd want to go. It was very interesting. But yeah, I agree with you that looking at things from the philosophical side and breaking them down by the different levels, allies, friendships, close friends, etc. To me, that's more, that side is like the defensive. It's like a filtering mechanism. How do I filter people and put them into categories? But then once you've got them in those categories, okay, I really want to foster the relationship and grow the relationships. How do I get better at doing that? And that's where these things at least point you in the right direction. That they're not tools. Just say, oh well, I want there to be respect, understanding, and goodwill. They're that's more like the goal, but it points you at least in the right direction of, okay, now what tools would I need in order to foster these things in these relationships? And, of course, empathy is a big one to get you there for understanding and respect as well, I would say. And I found for me, a great one for goodwill is, as I'm very big on affirmations and positive thinking. And thoughts are something that we have more control over than people realize. Kind of the idea behind positive thinking practices and affirmations is to swing your thoughts in a direction you want them to go. And so I will very specifically will have affirmations about having goodwill towards those people that are important to me in my life. And, having a goodwill for myself, and respect and understanding for myself as well. Because you want to foster that inner love as well.
Yeah.
And so that's been helpful for me as well. There's things like there's various tools for empathy, and nonviolent communication is one that's great. Positive thinking practices, having a positive thinking discipline, I found has added a lot of value in my life as well as a tool to create these things to strengthen them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say that I'm generally careful when it comes to affirmations and things like that, because I think there's a school around it that is kind of goes for overriding what you're feeling, and that's very disrespectful to your own self. But I'm pretty sure that you're not coming from that perspective. I heard some of your affirmations and how you do them, and I'm guessing that it's more about helping you focus on what your goals are and what you want to achieve, and kind of having your mind go along with them. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say that's a good way of putting it. And one of the things that can be included in an affirmation is things like, I am very mindful of my emotions. I am very self-aware. Mm-hmm. You can have these kind of affirmations that you're putting that thought in your mind that, where you're not going to dismiss your emotions with it. But yeah, affirmations, you're right. There's a lot of criticisms for affirmations of people. I mean, I haven't looked at them too closely, but in general, it seems like it's just the criticisms are around people that are maybe not using them correctly, and that's why they're failing.
Yeah,
it's not like affirmations are a bad thing or positive thinking is a bad thing. It's just if you're not doing it the right way, then it's not going to be effective. Which that could be said about
about anything.
Yeah, pretty much just about anything. And people will say, "Well, this is garbage."
And like self-esteem comes to mind for me.
Right, exactly. So, yeah, it's something you want to be very mindful and very deliberate in choosing what it is you're going to have as your affirmations, and making sure that you're not creating contradictions in your mind. Mm-hmm. I think that's really important to not have contradictions where trying to put in something in there that's just isn't jiving with reality kind of thing. The one thing that comes to mind is religion. I think religion, when typically children, are told this is how it is, and it doesn't really match what they're seeing in the reality, but they're told it over and over again and like punished if they question it, that the mental gymnastics that creates can be very detrimental to a person's mental health, and their ability to think right and to have a good grasp on philosophy and the like. And I think it's one of the things that leads to the broken philosophy that is so prevalent for most people. Where determining what is real and having a good methodology for figuring out what's right, what is real, those sort of things. It's not something they have very clear in their mind, because so many times they've been forced to suppress that desire to remove contradiction, right? Yeah, it's definitely something you want if you're interested in affirmations. If it's something that's interesting to you. I did a show on it called Positive Thinking that I did with Anthony Samaroff. Yeah, you'd want to think about, I guess,
Yeah.
Again, very deliberately what it is that you're doing. But I think some things lend themselves really well to affirmations. Some physical things lend themselves really well. I mean, like it's extremely well known and proven that placebos can be effective. Mm-hmm. Placebo can improve your chance of recovering from disease. So it just kind of proves that there is a truth to mind over matter. So having like a healthy mindset will help you to be healthier physically. Now that doesn't mean that you don't still have to eat right and get a lot of healthy movement in and exercise and the like. But that's a component of it. I mean, your mind can make you sick and your mind can make you well. And that's pretty well documented, so that's one of the things for sure that I think it's pretty easy to start implementing in if you're looking to implement an affirmations practice into your life with a little danger.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will definitely, I am interested in them, and I recommend my listeners to look into it as well, because, there's, I just wanted to bring kind of the objection up, I was actually addressing what I was guessing some of the listeners might think.
Sure.
Because I'm a little bit more familiar with your affirmations, but yeah, you have this parody version, right, in movies and places like that, where you have the miserable person looking into the mirror and I'm happy, I'm successful, I'm pretty, I'm happy. That's not what you're talking about, and I really look forward to exploring that, and I remember how powerful placebo can be. Like there were all these bogus medical procedures that lived on for decades simply because of the power of placebo. And then I think there was this knee surgery, if I remember correctly, where it turned out that you could just sedate people, not do anything, make a little scar, and they would experience the same recovery as by doing the actual surgery. And that's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that it really appears that there are certain illnesses, certain ailments that are really strongly impacted by the mind. The mind can really heal them. And then there are others where placebo has almost pretty much no effect. So it's probably in those ones where it was actually really effective to just have a good attitude that the cures lingered for a long time. For whatever reason, the mind has the ability to impact some diseases more than others,
Right.
It's really fascinating. Cool. Well, we're just about out of time here. I guess what's next in the series without giving away too much of the goods? I know I'm looking forward to hearing the conclusion of the series. Yeah,
so I kind of gave away the conclusion of the series, but that will be the last episode, and I will talk about what the limitations are and what I see as a potential for moving forward, and probably I'm very very interested in looking into NVC, for example, and we might have a conversation on just that topic alone.
I'd love that.
Yeah, as far as building these kind of positive skills and building goodwill and just in general raising your level of trust that you can have with people. That will be the final episode, but the episode before that's actually might come out before this one, or exactly at the same time, will be on boundaries and how they work and why they're important and what the limitations are when using them.
Oh, wow. I'm really looking forward to that. Yeah, boundaries are so important, and to have them explicit in your own mind. And I think it's also very helpful to often make them explicit in your relationships as well.
Yeah.
It's just such a powerful thing that it's just a skill that people are really lacking. And you see this lack of awareness of boundaries, lack of declaring boundaries just leads to so much calamity in people's relationships, and it's so tragic.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just there's not an awareness there, and it really goes back to what we were saying earlier about how it isn't something that is commonly taught in our culture. there's not that awareness there. I mean, plain and simple. And bringing that awareness to it really opens your eyes to why relationships are failing and why other ones are successful, and really enables you to be able to take control of your relationships and improve them, and minimize the ones that are not so great, and maximize the ones that are. So, all right, well, I can't think of a better spot to end than that. Why don't you tell my listeners where the best place is for them to find you?
Yeah, so you can visit valiantgrowth.com. That's the website of the podcast, but it's also available on. If you're listening to Choice Conversations, you will be able to find it. But it's on iTunes. It's on all the apps for Android and iOS, and just search for it. You will find it. There's also a Facebook page, same name, Valiant Growth, and there's also a Facebook group called Valiant Community, where we have discussions on these subjects.
Awesome. All right. And for your listeners, my website is choiceconversations.com. Just like Valiant Growth, I'm on all the apps and stuff. I just today, actually, literally this morning, discovered I was on Stitcher. I didn't even know I was on there, because I was talking to my website provider. I'm with Libsyn.
Mm-hmm, me too.
And I said, what do I need to do to get on Stitcher? And they're like, oh, you'll need to contact them and set up an account, and then we'll start syncing up and all that stuff. And so I put in an application to get a Stitcher account, and they rejected it. And I'm like, why did they reject it? I looked, and they're like, you already have one. And I'm like, what? So I guess I'll have to figure out what that's all about. But yeah, it shouldn't be hard to find. If you choiceconversations.com, go to Google Choice Conversations, I'll show right up. So, and I'm on all those social media stuff as well. Facebook, Twitter, not hard to find.
Yeah, and I recommend Choice Conversations. I endorse it. It's one of the podcasts that I listen to regularly. So go for it. There are a lot of interesting stuff there.
Oh, I really appreciate that. Yeah, and like I said, if my listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation, definitely go check out the rest of the series on stress-free relationships and the other work Philip is doing. I really admire how you're able to just present these ideas with, in such an organized and clear manner. And it's something that is one of the shortfallings of the conversation format for a podcast is it's more organic, right? And it goes in different tangents, and you don't always get this nice order of, we're going to present the arguments here, and then we're going to start fleshing them out, and then we're going to get to the conclusion, and it's,
yeah,
there are pros and cons, right, to the different formats. And I love the conversation format, but there are advantages to that solo format as well. And you do a really great job with it. And I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll definitely have to do this again.
Yeah.
Take care.
You too.
All right. Another one in the books. It's funny, that Stitcher thing, I've since gotten that issue resolved. I was, emailing back and forth with support for Stitcher, and they're like, yeah, it's strange that this was already set up. They're like, you don't happen to know a guy named Steve Patterson, do you? Said, yes. As a matter of fact, I do know that gentleman. So that's what happened, is that Steve had set up a Stitcher site for Two Beers with Steve, and I guess whenever it got converted to being the Choice Conversations podcast, the RSS feed just automatically switched it over to the name of the show within Stitcher to Choice Conversations. So that's how that all got resolved. And when I tried to enter my site in to Stitcher, it showed up as being a duplicate. But that's all resolved now, so I am now managing the Choice Conversations site on Stitcher and all that good stuff. So at any rate, it's good to have the Stitcher base covered, to know that I have that covered, since quite a few people like that app for their podcasting enjoyment. All right, so if you could do me a big favor and go out right now and share this episode on social media, that would be super, super awesome. You'd be my favorite person. If you go to the website, it's real easy. Just bring up the website, and they have buttons right at the top of each episode that you click them, and it'll share it on whatever your social media platform of choice happens to be. So that would be great. All right, thank you so much for listening in. As always, I love you all, and have a great day. Or not. The choice is yours.